So first of all, I want to thank you guys again for having me here to talk about our work on BGP routing security. As many of you know, we've been working on this problem for about 3 or 4 years. And it's really important for us to get your feedback on our work to make sure we're modeling the right things and we're actually reaching out to the people who are really going to deal with these problems in practice. Okay, so this is joint work with my two co-authors, Philippa Gill and Michael Shapira, who are sitting right over here. And what we're going to talk to you today about is deployment scenarios for BGP security. So as Randy mentioned, even if we had our PKI deployed in the internet, we're not done. There are still attacks on these systems. Actually, if you were here at NANOG last June, I actually gave a presentation on different attacks that are possible with our PKI and different versions of security protocols. So that's not what I'm going to talk about today. What I'm going to assume is we're working towards path validation and what kind of deployment scenarios and incentives can we put together to give ISPs reasons to deploy these protocols. So the focus is on incentives, and it's very easy to be pessimistic in this design space. So if you were to hear that you have to all of a sudden deploy BGP-SEC in your routers, the first thing you might say is, why should I do this? There's no security benefits if I'm the first router to deploy BGP-SEC. I can't speak BGP-SEC to anyone. I can't get any benefit from the protocol. So there really needs to be a critical mass of people using the protocol, just like with IPv4, before we can get any value from the protocol. So that's the first problem. And the second problem you might say is, well, I can't make any money off of this protocol, so how can I justify this to my CEO, to my manager? Why should I do this? Science fiction, right? So what we want to do in this work is say that actually things aren't as bad as you think. What this work is going to talk about is how you can use BGP security as a differentiated service to attract your customers away from your competitors and towards your network. So the idea is if you have some reason to deploy BGP-SEC in order to get more customers, that'll sort of push deployment globally through the internet, and we may end up in a world where we have actually most of the internet running path validation. So what we're doing in this work is we want to design and engineer the BGP-SEC deployment process. By the way, I'm saying BGP-SEC because I'm part of that group, but also this applies both to SOBGP or any sort of path validation you want it to do in these systems. So we want to design this deployment process to make ISPs have ways to earn money by deploying these protocols, with the goal of eventually arriving at a state where most of the world is running BGP security in some form. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about some of the guidelines and the evaluation we did in order to claim that these are sort of the right guidelines for how you should deploy path validation in these systems. And before I start, I want to just present this quick caveat. This requires a lot of modeling and simulation. As you might imagine, this process is extremely complicated, so we couldn't capture every possible detail. What I'm trying to do here is show you some of the trends and important issues that we've uncovered. We're not actually claiming that we can predict how BGP-SEC deployment will really go in reality. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is talk about, first, just review how BGP works, some of the attacks on BGP, and how things like RPKI and path validation can prevent these attacks. Then I'm going to present the main contribution of this work, which is our strategy for BGP-SEC deployment. So how should we actually go about deploying these systems? And then I'll justify to you why we think this is the right approach. The way we justify this is by modeling the deployment process and also running simulations on the deployment process. So I'm going to show you some of our results on how we evaluated our strategy. And finally, I'll conclude with some recommendations on how we think this process should evolve. Okay? So let's just review quickly how BGP works. So we have here a prefix. There it is. And we have all these ISPs and ASs that would like to reach this prefix. So what's going to happen is we have these two ASs. They're both Verizon Wireless ASs. They're announcing the path to this prefix, this /24 that we're interested in. And the way BGP works, as we know, it's a path vector protocol. So each AS will put its name on the path. Okay, so it's the two-hop path to the /24 that we're interested in. Now, level 3 is going to route to this prefix and then announce to his neighbor, ISP1 and China Telecom, that this is how they reach the prefix. And of course, the path is level 3 Verizon and 223894. Okay? So the reason I picked this particular arrangement of ASs is because something very interesting happened on April 8th, 2010. Many of you might have heard of this. This China Telecom router, or some China Telecom router, hijacked a bunch of prefixes, about 50,000 prefixes, and Philippa has actually done extensive research into the empirical data we have from this day, so if you have questions on that, you can talk to her. So we have, this prefix was advertised by China Telecom, and what happened from the perspective of ISP1 was it says, look, I have two paths. I don't know where this prefix really lives. As we know, it lives here attached to this Verizon AS, but ISP1 didn't know where it was. So it looks at these two paths, it compares them, it says the China Telecom path is 1 hop long, which is shorter than 3 hops long. So awesome, here's how I'm going to route. Okay, and so the traffic was diverted through to the wrong router and it didn't reach the destination. Now, if you read the Rensis blog, They also ran some trace routes and found that some of this traffic was intercepted. So what really happened here was that there was a router that knew the real route to the prefix we're talking about here, and it was routing this way. And what happened was the traffic went from this faulty router through to the router that knew where the prefix was and just was intercepted by China Telecom Network. Okay. So this is the type of attack that we really want to prevent, and this is why we need path validation. So just going to quickly review what BGPsec does. So BGPsec uses cryptographic signatures, and what would happen now is when you make your BGPsec announcement, you're going to announce your path, and you're going to forward sign, like Randy said. So this AS authorizes Verizon Wireless to announce this path. And now, as people continue announcing their paths, each person is going to sign their path. So level 3 is forward signing to ISP1, the path that it's using to the prefix. Verizon is forward signing to level 3, the path that it's using, and so on. So basically, if you have all 3 public keys, which you should have because the RPKI stores these public keys, you're going to be able to validate that this announcement was made by the 3 ASs on the path, and you know where the prefix really was. Okay, so now I'm showing you here a perfect world. All of these ASs are secure. Okay, this is where we want to be. But that's not where we're going to be immediately. We're going to live in a world of partial deployment for a long time. So let's imagine a possible partial deployment scenario. Let's assume China Telecom hasn't upgraded to BGPsec yet. Everybody else has. Okay, and what happens if there was a really malicious router here? Okay, so this is what our router is going to do. It's going to announce the same prefix that's owned by this AS right here. But instead of claiming to own the prefix itself, so doing a one-hop attack, it's going to it's going to lie and say it's claimed that it's attached directly to this AS. Right? So now, what should ISP1 do? Well, it should check the RPKI to see what the valid origin for this prefix is. And of course, it's 22394, which is great. So this announcement is valid. And then it says, OK, which path is shorter? China Telecom. Awesome, I'm going to route to China Telecom. Okay? So what's wrong with this picture? So what happened here is that this ISP is not incorporating the security preferences into its BGP routing policy. Okay, so one really important point that we have to make when we talk about BGPsec deployment, it's not enough just to sign and validate. It's not enough just to upgrade your routers with the crypto signatures and validations. You actually have to use this information for something. So there must be some influence of the signatures or the security state on the BGP decision process. So if you're a security geek like I am and my co-authors are, you would say the first thing you should do in your BGP decision process is check that the route is secure. If it's secure, it should be preferred over all other routes that are unsigned or invalid or whatever. Prefer those first, and then do your local policy. So local pref, AS path, med, whatever you want. Okay, this would be nice. But I don't think you guys are all going to immediately be comfortable with doing this, right? Because this is going to really impact how routing might go on your networks. So what we're going to assume in this deployment scenario that I'm going to show is that you're not willing to put security over local pref or AS path. You're going to put it after local pref or AS path. So this is the second last stage in your decision process. Okay? And we made this assumption so that we wouldn't have to make over-assumptions that we think that operators would be willing to put security first, but we just want to assume that it's somewhere in the decision process. So I'm going to call this assumption is that secure ISPs should at the very least break ties, so at the second last state, in favor of secure routes. Okay? So now that I've gone over some of the background in the attacks, I want to show our strategy for BGP deployment. But before I do that, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about economics, because this is really an economic problem, and we need to figure out how that's going to affect the way deployment goes. So I'm going to present a very simple model of AS-level business relationships. I'm sure almost all of you have seen this before. So one relationship that ASs can have is customer to provider. So the customer pays the provider both to send and to receive. Okay, so I show this with an arrow. You can see there's an arrow. That means that the money is traveling from the customer to the provider. And another business relationship we could have is a peer-to-peer business relationship. So we have 2 ASs that are having a settlement-free peering agreement. So for example, 2 tier 1s who no one pays each other for service, or something like that. Google has a lot of these relationships with its neighbors. So no money travels on these links. Okay, so this is sort of where the money is flowing in these systems. And another important point that we have to make is that there's different kinds of ASs in the internet. Some ASs act as end sites. Some ASs provide transit. So what a stub is, as Randy said, it's an AS that has no customers of its own. It never does transit, right? So for example, this should never happen. This guy's a stub. He's got 2 providers. He shouldn't be carrying traffic from one provider to the other, because that means he's got to pay both of them for the privilege of doing this. Okay, so what we're going to assume is that stub ASs are basically origins or destinations for traffic, but they don't do transit. Now, this is really important because 85% of ASs in the Internet AS graph are stubs. Okay, so we can't just ignore these guys. When we think about BGP-SEC deployment, it's really important to think what we're going to do with these guys because they make up so much of the Internet. Okay, so the other point is that ISPs make money by providing transit to their customers, right? So that's really going to be another thing that we're going to use in our analysis, is that we're going to assume that when an ISP attracts more customer traffic, it earns more money. Okay? The main source of revenue for ISPs, or at least one of the major sources, is getting money from their customers. So the more customers an AS can attract, the happier they are. Okay? So that's what we're going to assume in this work. So how can we use these two ideas, that secure ISPs break ties in favor of secure paths, and also that ISPs can attract more money by getting more customers? Okay. So let's look at this example here. I'm showing here Sprint is trying to reach this destination, which is the stub we talked about before. And he's got two paths. Both of them are equally long, so they're 2 hops long. Both of them are through peers, so they're basically of equal cost. So which path should he choose? So we're going to assume he runs some kind of tie-break algorithm, and the tie-break is in favor of 8359. Okay? So now this is in the world where everyone is insecure. All these ASs are purple. Okay? Now let's imagine a partial deployment scenario. Actually, before I do that, I want to say that this AS, if we look at him, he's carrying traffic from Sprint to his customer. Okay? That means that he's delivering a larger volume of traffic to his customer. That means his customer should be paying him more. Okay, so in this case, this guy is happy because he's delivering more customer traffic to his customers. So now let's talk about a partial deployment scenario where we have 3 ASs that are secure, so Sprint, 13789, and 18608. These 3 guys are secure, and we have 8359 insecure. Okay? So now what's going to happen is there's going to be 2 paths that are learned here. And by the way, to the last question that was asked to Randy, this AS is insecure, so even though this one is secure, the announcement coming here is just a plain BGP announcement, not a BGP-SEC announcement. Right? So this is what we mean when we say secure islands. This is a secure path. This guy is a secure path because all the ASs are secure. This is not because we have one insecure AS on the path. Okay, so Sprint is learning 2 announcements. One of them is secure and one of them is insecure. And like I said before, they're equally long, both through peers, and show it has to do a tie-break. Okay? So now what we're going to assume is that the tie-break goes in favor of secure paths, and the traffic is going to go through 13789. So now what happens is we have to look at this insecure AS. In the old world, when everyone was insecure, he was getting as much more traffic than this guy. He was serving traffic from Sprint to his customer. In the new world where this guy's become secure, 8359 is no longer delivering as much traffic to his customer, and so he's losing money. Okay? So the idea that we're going to use here is that an ISP that's insecure is going to be losing customer traffic to its competitors, and that's going to create reasons for it to feel like it's falling behind. It better deploy secure routing or it's going to lose a lot of its customers. And this is exactly what we believe will drive the deployment process. So now this is really what we're proposing here. This is the 3 guidelines that we're going to propose for BGP-SEC deployment. The first one is the one I've been talking about before. Secure ISPs should, at the very minimum, break ties in favor of secure paths. If your ISP feels like it wants to rank security first above local pref, awesome. Our results will still hold. But we're assuming at the very, very minimum, you're going to assume that security matters right before tie breaks. Okay, so this is the first assumption we're going to make. The second thing we're going to say is that there should be a bunch of early adopter ISPs. So when we ran our simulations, we did extensive studies to try to figure out who should the early adopters be. These are ASs that either the government has created regulations saying that they have to be secure. So for example, they may be military providers or something like this. These may be ASs with a special interest in security. They may be altruistic. But we have this initial set of ASs that's going to become secure. And what our simulations show is about 5 of the biggest tier 1s is what we need, plus or minus 5 or 10 ASs. Okay? And the final point, which is really important, is we have to figure out how we're going to deal with stub ASs. So what we're going to assume is as soon as an ISP becomes secure, so for example, this guy became secure, what he's going to do is he's going to secure his stub customers. Okay? So when you turn on your ISP, the next thing you're going to do is go to all of your stub customers and start upgrading them to BGP-SEC. Okay? Now the reason that we think this is legitimate is what Randy talked about with the secure end site. Right? So a stub is an AS that only originates its own prefix. It doesn't do transit for other ASs. So it's enough from the perspective of the global internet for these guys to sign for their own prefixes and trust their providers to validate for them. As Randy said, this doesn't require a hardware upgrade, and the security impact is quite low. So we analyze the security impact. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but if you have questions, I can answer them afterwards. So this is sort of a cheap way to get as many stubs to become secure as quickly as possible. So this is one place where we really see government incentives as being useful. If we turn on the ISPs, they should be subsidized to turn on their customers, because this is really what's going to push forward all of the deployment. And again, like I said, this is really important because so much of the internet is stubs. Okay, so I've presented now the strategy. That's really what we're proposing for the way that BGP-SEC should be deployed, or any other path validation protocol. How can I claim that this makes sense? So what I'm going to do is present a model we came up with for the deployment process and show you some simulation results that we ran on the UCLA Cyclops data. This is a map of the inter-domain AS level relationships. We simulated this process on it, and we can use that to say that our strategy makes sense. Okay. So let me start by presenting the model. So our model is very simple. Okay, we start with the AS graph. Everybody is insecure. The early adopters become secure. So the 5 tier 1s we decided should be early adopters. They become secure, and their stub customers become secure. The next thing we do, we go in rounds. We look at all the insecure ISPs in the network. We say, if I was to become secure, how much more traffic would I get? If I get more than theta% more traffic, then I'm becoming secure, and if not, I don't. Okay, so we just compute how much more traffic they would get by becoming secure. So for example, if you see a 5% increase by becoming secure, you're going to upgrade your network. And of course, when you upgrade your network, you're also going to upgrade your stubs networks, okay, to simplex BGP. And we continue this process until no new secure ISPs want to become secure, and that's where we stop. Okay, so this is just to say that each round in the simulation could take multiple years. We don't immediately expect ISPs to upgrade their stubs the second they become secure, but we sort of mush this all together so we can run effective simulations on this. Okay. So the other thing I need to tell you before I finish, how do we compute customer traffic volume? So we do a very simple computation. What we say is if you have a destination that you're reaching on a customer edge, then just count the number of ISPs, ASs that are routing through you, and that's the amount of traffic you're delivering to this customer. Okay? And we just do this for all possible customer destinations. So how do we determine routing in this network? So what we're going to do is we're going to use a standard model of BGP routing policies and simulate how traffic flows on these AS graphs that we got from UCLA Cyclops. Okay, so the routing policies we model is just local pref, AS path, prefer security, and then the arbitrary tiebreak. Our model of local pref is just customer is better than peer is better than provider. Okay. So that's our model. And now I want to show you some simulation results. So we ran multiple simulations. Each one of our simulations took a day to half a day to run. We ran them on 200 machines. I'm just going to tell you one of the simulations that we ran. What we did was we picked 10 early adopters, 5 of the biggest tier 1s. This is the biggest according to the graph we had, so Sprint, Verizon, AT&T, Level 3, and Cogent. And we picked 5 large content providers, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Akamai, and Limelight. So we assume these guys become secure at the beginning of the process, and we run the simulation and see how many ASs end up secure at the end of the process. So what did we find? We found at the end of the process, 85% of ASs in our internet graph became secure. And you may be wondering how many of these ASs were stubs and how many of them were ISPs. Well, in fact, 65% of the ISPs in our graph become secure. So it really is showing an effective deployment. So in case you've got lost in all the details, the strategy works. Okay, and now let me show you why it works. Okay? So here, let's start with an example. We have our early adopter. So remember I said Sprint was one of our early adopters. It's secure. Nobody else is secure. And the way traffic is going to this stub here, 18608, is through 8359. Okay? So at round 1, 13789 says, okay, let me become secure. If I become secure, my stub becomes secure. And then traffic is going to shift through me, and I'm happier because I'm delivering more traffic to my stub. Okay, that was round 1. Some stuff happens. In round 4, 8359 says, wait a minute, I've lost my traffic. If I become secure, I'm going to get at least 5% increase in customer traffic. And so I'm going to turn on, and I'm going to get the traffic back to the stub through me. Okay? And just to mention that I'm showing here just for one particular customer destination, the stub that I'm showing, 18608. We ran this for all possible destinations, but since there's 36,000 of them, I can't show them to you on the slide. Okay, so this is just one of them. So now that 8359 became secure, we actually can look at even longer secure paths. So for example, at round 4, the traffic for this stub, 50197, goes on this path. What happens at round 5 is 6731 says, if I become secure and my stub becomes secure, the traffic is going to shift and go through me. Okay? So really what's happening is a lot of competition for these multi-home stubs. And this process will continue. We can look at even longer paths. We have this longer path here. What's going to happen at round 7 is that 14209 is going to say, if I become secure and my stub becomes secure, then the traffic will shift through me and I'm going to earn more money. Okay, and this is really what we see as driving the deployment process. And all we need for this is to break ties on secure paths. Okay, we didn't have to assume any other assumptions on where security goes in the BGP hierarchy. So one really important question is who should the early adopters be? If you read our paper, if you go to, if you go to our written material on this stuff, we've done extensive simulations trying many different kinds of early adopters. I'm not going to present too many of the details, but basically what we found is that tier 1s are extremely important. The reason for this is they have many multi-home stubs connected to them. Content providers are important. Even though they provide a large volume of traffic, they don't have as many multi-home stubs associated with them, and so they don't create as much path diversity as the tier 1s would do initially. So what we're really seeing is the tier 1s are the most important initial early adopters here, and the content providers can help a lot as well. And I have lots more details on this, so please ask me if you have questions about this. So I'm just going to wrap up so we have time for questions. The first really important point that we feel from this space is that secure BGP or BGP-SEC, in order to improve security, it has to impact route selection, and therefore it's going to impact traffic engineering. Now, you may think this is a bad thing. This can also be a good thing. The way we can think about this is impact on traffic engineering gives you an opportunity to offer a differentiated service, taking customers away from your competitors, and potentially having security deployments pay for themselves at your ISP. Because you've received such an increase in customer revenue, that actually may pay for the router upgrades. And that's what we see as driving this whole process. The main reason we did this work was we wanted to provide some guidance to regulators and governments on how to subsidize this process, where to put the money in this process. One of the most important and obvious places is to pay off the early adopters to adopt the protocol, because at the beginning they're not really getting much benefit from the protocol. They're sort of doing this to kick off the process and get things going. The next really important point that we think is that ISPs need to be active participants in this process. When they upgrade themselves, it's really important to upgrade their customers as well. This is another place we see government incentives playing a role. And it's really important to consider this because so much of the internet is stubs that are creating the path diversity and the competition over traffic. So just to reiterate, our work is not predictive, but we do hope that we've captured some of the key issues affecting deployment. I've left a lot of the details out in this talk because I don't have much time. I encourage you to go to our website here. This has a detailed technical report. In addition to the technical report, there's a little console app that you can download that can let you browse through our simulations and see what ASs became secure when and with what increase in customer traffic. So we have full simulations available on this website. And so since I left out so many details, I hope we have time for questions, and please feel free to ask me about things that I didn't get a chance to talk about. Okay, thank you. So we have 5 minutes for questions.
Tom Daly from Dynank. Great work, Sharon. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciated it. Did you happen to model at the point where most of your ASNs become secure, does the original traffic pattern shift back in any way? And so essentially as an ISP, do you receive a one-time lift of revenue and then eventually that goes away? Okay,
I have a slide just for you, okay? So we had to cut this because we didn't have time. So what I'm going to show you now is these are the 3 ISPs that we saw the traffic jumping around for them before. We want to see their increases in traffic volume over time. So this is the simulation that I showed before. What's happening here is this guy, the red, he became secure first at round 4, and then the green became secure right after to steal the traffic back. So what you can see what happened is as time goes by, their traffic volume drops because they're losing traffic to their competitors, and then it shoots up. Right? So there's this period of time where it shoots up, and then it sort of goes back to normal. So the reason it's going back to normal here is because most of the internet has become secure, and so there's really not as much competition for this guy to win. But the point that's important here is if we look at him, he's blue. Okay, so let's look at blue. He never became secure. So what happened to him is his traffic volume sort of tapers off. Okay, the reason he never became secure is it sort of tapered off to around 4% loss, and we required a 5% threshold, so we never turned on. So really, the bottom line is the security, your traffic volume will go up for a while, and then it'll go back. But the nice thing about when it goes back is most of the internet is secure. Okay, so that's how we see this going.
Thank you.
Tony Capella, 9.5 Zeta, and I like the presentation. Thank you. I do have a question, though, about perhaps secondary benefits, if there's any potential for you to simulate or consider this. As the internet scales and grows, of course, people try to filter things today with essentially flat lists, prefix filters, and so forth on edges. And there's various means, of course, to build them and automate them and try to make them accurate. After this stuff kind of evens out again, it seems like we want to have something else to talk about, which could suggest that we ought to continue to do it and make it scale better, make it more beneficial in some other secondary way. So, for example, is there any benefit to saying to an operator, or could you characterize to an operator an additional improvement in operational efficiencies because now they're perhaps less interested in or don't have to worry about some aspects that they were previously concerned with? Is this at all tangential here?
We haven't covered that in this work, so I guess one thing you might look at is how BGP security might interact with some stuff like prefix filtering. Is that what you were talking about, for example? Yeah, we actually talked about in last year's NANOG talk with Michael Shapira. We analyzed how SBGP works in the presence of prefix filtering. We actually found that this is not in this work at all, but last year, you can look at my NANOG talk from last year, what we found was that secure routing and path validation prevents one kind of attack, which is like a path shortening attack. Prefix filtering prevents things like stubs doing route leaks, announcing paths too widely. These are attacks that can even exist with secure BGP. So what we actually see in the long term is that prefix lists are something that should continue to be used, along with secure routing, because they sort of stop a different form of attack. The nice thing about prefix lists is they're extremely incrementally deployable. You want to use them in your AS, use them, you're done, you don't have to care about anyone else. The reason we focused on economics in this work is because secure routing really needs participation from a lot of ISPs before we have any security properties.
Hi, Rob Seastrom on my own behalf. We already have something called the IRR, and we've had trouble getting really as much uptake as we might have in it due to it just being a pain to do it, right? And that's bog simple compared to secure BGP. And I'm curious as to, you talked about government subsidies or some sort of preferential treatment or something like that, but that can't be something that you're advocating having happen ad infinitum, and there's a cost associated with doing this in particular, and I'm wondering if this is sort of one of those things that we were discussing sort of on the side while you were making your presentation. This is very analogous to the credit card fraud problem, right? Where if the cost of solving the problem exceeds the cost of the pain that you're getting from the problem, it's sometimes the smarter thing to do to just suck it up and write off the losses. So I was wondering if you addressed any of the more of the economic issues than you alluded to here in your research and your model.
Okay, so you're looking at so the question sort of asks, what's the cost of suffering from a routing attack versus the cost of actually securing the routing infrastructure? So the answer is no, we haven't addressed that at all. So we were going from this basic assumption that we're looking for defenses against strong attacks, the kind of attacks that we have not seen yet today, which, by the way, we don't need to see because the easy attacks really work well, right? So no, we haven't actually done an assessment for the costs of those attacks, and that would need a lot more data than what I have right now to be able to comment on, but that's a really good point. What we're thinking about with this is we really want to secure routing infrastructure, and this is how we need to get there. Okay, so if we're going to do it, this is how we're going to do it, but I don't have a quantification of what kind of financial losses we would suffer from, let's say someone decides to take down the US's BGP system, right? So I don't have any data on that.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, so this is the last question.
Hi, Chris P. Soft Layer Technologies. As a stub network and content provider, is there any incentive for me to be an early adopter or just wait for my upstreams to secure me?
Is there any incentives for me to be an early adopter? Not in the model that we considered. So your incentives would be more security incentives. Another thing that you might be able to do is you might be creating like a secure island starting at yourself if you become secure. And if you're multi-home, that can sort of create incentives for your providers to fight over serving you traffic and potentially become secure. But we didn't really look at economic incentives for that. I think the main reason that a stub ISP would want to become secure is for its own security interests. I guess just in the models that we're thinking of, stubs don't really earn money from providing transit, so we couldn't really figure out how to model those economic incentives. Do I have time for one more? Okay, Jared, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm trying to jump in for a second. Jared Mosh with NTT. I actually see a disincentive for players like SoftPlayer for doing something like this, because they'll end up, their goal is to optimize their utilization of their multiple upstream providers. And if one of their upstream providers then actually secures the routing system, they're going to end up with polarization of their traffic on their path, and is actually going to destroy their network TE. So I think there's some space here to continue to look at your model and some of these subsequent consequences that Rob also raised about the subsidization and actually convincing people to actually secure their systems. Because the CDNs and the hosting companies, they really actually care about their network performance a lot more than they actually care about a little minor security blip.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, actually. So one of the things about this work is that we're assuming that more traffic is good. That's not always true if you haven't engineered your network to deal with more traffic. So yeah, this is a really important issue that we didn't model in this because this was complicated enough for us at this point. I think the point that I want to make to this room is that secure routing will impact traffic engineering, and so it's something we need to think of. Okay, so if you sort of take away one point, maybe you don't buy the fact that you want all of your traffic to go through a secure path because that may burn out one of your links. But the fact that the traffic engineering will be affected by this, I think, is an important thing, both as an advantage and a disadvantage, but mostly as we see it as an advantage. Okay, so thank you.